If you want a seven-figure entrepreneur to give you his best secrets on how you can start your own successful business, then listen to this podcast because in this episode, Sumner Healey stops by. He's the CEO of a company called The Land Pioneer, and at 27, he's already a very successful entrepreneur. So the first question I had to ask him was, Sumner, what are the top three qualities that you embody that make you more successful in business than 99% of people? And this was his answer.
Such a good question. And I didn't prepare for this question, but I think I prepared for this question my whole life. And so I've got the answer at the very tip of my tongue. And so for me, it really comes down to three central points. And I think first and foremost, this is kind of from a macro perspective, is ultimately a curiosity about the world. I think when we're curious and we're engaged with the world, we start seeing problems and we can start finding solutions. And at the end of the day, entrepreneurship, building a business, it's quite literally just solving someone's problem. And it starts one to one. And then as you scale and as you grow, it's one to many. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we're just solving problems. And so naturally, you got to be curious about the world. Now, it's not just enough to be curious about the world. There's many folks that are curious and never turn that curiosity into momentum. So I think that the next thing is just having a tendency towards action. It's a blessing and a curse, right? Like I have a tendency to always view things in terms of right now. So I'm really quick to take action, but there's an old saying, it's like ready, fire, aim, right? And I think that's kind of been my principle with life. And so I'm quite frankly, I can be incredibly sloppy, right? So it's a blessing and a curse in terms of I'm really, really good at taking something from 0 to 1. But what I've learned deeper into my entrepreneurial career is I need to hire people to get me from 1 to 2 and 2 and on and on and on again, because I'm good at that initial kind of push. But when I look at most folks that have aspirations to be entrepreneurial or to live life on their own terms, there's typically a disconnect in terms of taking action and doing it really quickly. I think momentum is a really important thing, and far too often we discount its powers. I'm not the most disciplined, motivated, aspirational guy ever. I just know how to engineer my life to get a result quickly. And then that initial momentum is what carries me forward. It's really, really difficult to stay on the path when you're not seeing any results. And so I just try to engineer things to get me that initial result quickly. Now, the next point though, is even if you have a curiosity about the world and you're taking action, a lot of times your path is going to be riddled with failure. There's just no way around it. It's just the nature of trying a lot of things and experiencing and experimenting. And so the way I've reframed that process of quote unquote failure is I've always looked at myself as a scientist, and that sounds ridiculous, but I look at business in terms of the lens of the scientific method, right? And I start with a hypothesis and I test and I take the feedback and I make a decision from there. And that reframe takes a failure from something that's daunting and terrible and negative to just a data point. And so I just take that data point and then pivot and make a decision from there. And so that's, I think, allowed me to have a little additional perseverance. Again, it's not because I'm the most disciplined or anything along those lines. It's just that subtle reframe. And even today within my business on more of a micro level, really my role as a CEO and someone that's got a team is outside of the day-to-day operations, I need to be constantly looking forward and running experiments to see what our next steps are. And it really doesn't ever stop, right? So those are the 3 points I think I would distill maybe my success. And ultimately, some of it is just, quite frankly, luck and a good upbringing. But those are the 3 characteristics I believe to be important.
Nice. That makes sense. One that I'd be curious to hear you elaborate on a little bit is the action orientation that you talked about, the ready, fire, aim.
Yeah.
Because I notice in my experience, I've dabbled in trying to create an online business, not many, but I've tried to create one. And what I noticed was that the amount of just like boring logistical things that are necessary to put in place was so daunting that it started to slow me down because there was no desire to do those things, and my why was driven pretty much entirely by the desire to be financially free and make money. And so I'm curious what you think it takes to be able to actually have the discipline to maintain that action and trudge through the drudgery of, back end website work or things of that nature, especially if you're in a position where you can't outsource that stuff yet.
Yeah. So this is another great question. And I've actually got, it's not sample size one anymore, right? I used to just give feedback based off my own experience. But now that we've launched landinvestor.co, which is like a coaching platform for other land investors, I see a lot of new folks that are coming to us and they're like, this is their first entrepreneurial experience. They're very green to the process. And I do see that they have a tendency towards action, but it's typically a tendency towards action in terms of the wrong areas. Just because we're taking immediate action and we're trying to build momentum doesn't mean that we're building momentum in the correct area. So I'm a pretty systematic thinker. And so I look at everything in terms of systems, and I look at everything in terms of, I've got a finite amount of actions or levers that I can pull. I talk about things in terms of levers because I imagine this like switchboard with different things that I can toggle on. Let's say I've only got 2 or 3 levers I can pull on before I exhaust my internal discipline or internal like fortitude. I want to be really mindful about what levers I'm pulling. So for example, what I see a lot of folks doing, we'll use it under the guise of land investing, is they come to me, okay, Sumner, I'm opening up an LLC. I started my business bank account. They're doing all these things, which quite frankly are fucking irrelevant. Like, you earn the right to do that at a certain point, but initially that's not what you need at all. And so when we reverse it and look at my experience when I first started, it was drudgery and it was painful, but I was writing letters to landowners to try to get deals. I didn't have a business bank account, didn't have a name. It was under my own name. Hey, I'm Sumner Healey and I want to buy a property from you. And so the momentum of getting a deal is way more powerful than getting your LLC verified by the state, right? So again, I think we've got a finite amount of internal fortitude that we can use. It's really important to place it in the right areas. And so I see a lot of folks getting caught up like, I'm grinding, I'm spending the weekend building my website, but you have no clients. Go get a client, then figure out to build your website down the road. And so I think it's really important to figure out what levers we're pulling on and pull the right ones. I think the next thing too, and as cliche as this is, it is true. Like, we do need to distill and figure out what exactly our why is. Like, what's the rationale behind why we're doing this? And it's okay to start with superficial reasons. Like, I got into the gym because I wanted to be skinny. I didn't want to be skinny anymore, right? Like, very superficial reason, but eventually that turns into something different. It's the same thing with business. You can start with, I just want to make some cash, and it can evolve and expand over time. But I think as the problems become bigger, your why needs to become bigger as well. So you can't be using the little why of trying to make money when you're trying to solve $10 million problems, right? Like, you need something that anchors you and pulls you a little bit more. And so I think a lot of people too, they hit a dead end because honestly, the why is just not compelling enough. No matter how systematic you are and how intellectual you try to become with pulling the right levers, there's still going to be hard stuff. There's no way around it. And so I think clarifying why you're really doing it is important.
What is your why for your current business?
Yeah, it's ever evolving for certain. I don't think it's ever something that I can just point to and say, I've got it figured out. But it's something that I'm constantly coming back and questioning. And honestly, like, it started for a lot of the same reasons that most folks draw upon: financial freedom, time freedom, yada, yada, yada. But quickly you exhaust that. And I think to some degree, I probably have potentially a chip on my shoulder, I think, to some degree. And I think that is, while that can be viewed in a negative light, there is a lot of power to harnessing that and channeling it in the correct way. And so whether it's from just some really random childhood stuff that's cut really deep that probably was insignificant, but I'm still carrying with me, I don't know. But I think there is something rooted in my childhood. I also do think, to some extent though, the more time that I've pondered the meaning of life, I guess, I don't know, the more I feel like to live a really great life is to give your gift to the world, right? And I think we're most aligned, we're most fulfilled and content and engaged with the world when we are giving our gift to the world. And I think there's that sounds so significant, but your gift could be knitting cat sweaters or playing the violin on a street corner, just whatever lights your soul on fire. And for me, it's every time without fail, what inspires me is building things, and it's just under the guise of building businesses. And so while there is a little bit of that angst of like, I'm trying to prove to myself that maybe I'm worthy, I don't know, but I think there is a really clear also like, I feel like I was put on the earth to do this stuff, and I just feel really aligned with it. And it's interesting because I got so much flack growing up because I was always interested in business, that I was money hungry, or that I love money. Like, it honestly has so little to do with that at all. I live a very simple existence, and I think money is a nice way to measure your results, but it ends there. Like, that can't be the game that you're playing. So yeah, and it's ever evolving. But as of today, October 6th, that's what my why is.
I like that. On the note of offering your gift to the world, like you were just mentioning, what would you say to the person who feels like their gift isn't something that is very immediately valuable to the market? They want to be financially free, but maybe they're a musician or they're a painter or something like that. Would you recommend that if they want to become financially free and not have to just, live kind of a rat race, financially oriented existence their whole life, would you recommend that they focus on building up a business around their current deepest passions, or would you recommend that they try to find something that offers value to high value customers, like starting a media agency or learning to copyright or things of that nature? Like, how would you approach that?
Oh man, yeah. Okay, so I think there's counterexamples to both, right?
Okay.
I've seen in my own life that there's folks that have said, I know what my passion is, I know what I love, and I'm not going to marry that to my work. In fact, I'm going to allow work to be a vehicle to give me freedom to spend the time doing that. And I've seen the counter of that, where people say, this might not do anything for a decade or more, but I'm going to keep at it. And luckily, we live in a day and age where it's being a painter or being a musician or whatever it may be, the world is so almost fragmented in a sense, where there's so many little micro audiences out there. And through the connectivity of the internet and globalization, like, you might not have found it yet, but I could almost guarantee there's 1,000 people out there that would be ravenous for what you have. It just might take time to connect those dots. And I think on a personal level, the people that I respect the most, I have the most admiration for, are the ones that were undeterred and they kept at it. You see stories of artists that never even made it in their lifetime. It was only thereafter, once they passed away, that their art became notorious. Or the folks that had struck lightning in a bottle and they were 50 years old and they had been at it since they were in their 20s. I have such respect for that. Now, of course, catch 22 is, you got to meet your basic needs, right? Like, if you don't have a roof over your head, you don't have stability, you can't provide for yourself the bare necessities, you got to get that figured out first, right? But if you're willing to sacrifice a quote unquote lavish existence to chase what you love most, to me, that I have so much admiration and respect for. So different strokes, different folks. I think I can't give a one size fits all answer because I've seen enough counter examples, but I would say what resonates to me the most is the ones that stick it out. And I really do believe, and I've seen this play out, not necessarily people I know personally, but with people that are notorious just through the internet or media nowadays. Like, people have done it. They have figured out a way to monetize what you would never have thought could have been monetized. And it's only in a day and age like today where that possibility exists. And that's why I feel a lot of gratitude to be born in the time that I was born in. So yeah, I mean, very interesting, great question. I would say that's something that someone needs to look inside to find the answer to. Kind of a cop-out answer, but it's true. Slightly unrelated, but I'll tie this all back together. The most sought out people in this world for whatever their craft is, whatever their profession is, I've always found, like you mentioned, is folks that skill stack to some degree, right? And I think there's so much power in being in the top of your category. Really hard to be the best musician in the world, right? We could all agree it's pretty darn difficult, but it's certainly possible to stack different variables on top to put yourself in a category of one, and you are the number one. And so I think there's so much power to stack different variables on top of yourself and kind of create your own market. But now I'm going to tie this all together. In my family, this goes back for generations, probably 3 or 4 generations that I'm aware of. I might even go back further than that. I can't think of a single person that's ever worked a normal job in my family. My mom did a brief stint working at a hotel. For the rest of it, everyone's always owned their own business. In terms of worldly success, that doesn't really exist in my family. Like, no one's had like outlandish success. The reason that to see your point here, you're saying I could go learn a skill and go leverage that skill to create income and then eventually have enough income and go do what I want kind of deal. What I would say is a better framework to utilize is go learn a high value skill and then use that to propel whatever it is that you want to do. As in, you go learn copywriting, you start writing on the topic of what you love, and you use that as a way to generate clients or get eyeballs on you. And when I look at my family that's all entrepreneurial, no one's ever taken the time just to learn the basic components of business admin, of marketing, of sales. And so like their whole business has been predicated on word of mouth and time, which is a really hard way to build a business. And so if you go and become a subject matter expert at YouTube SEO, right? And then you start using that to draw eyeballs to your main thing instead of offering that as a service, to me, that's how you can marry all these things together. And so I would think that acquiring high value skills is paramount, but not as a way to go sell it to others, as a way to propel what you're already doing. And really at the core of it, like the Land Pioneer and the whole land business is simply just that. Like it's a stacking of a bunch of different skills I've acquired over time, but also the way I got this to work was by using outside information from other business experiences and also other educators, and then pulling that all in to somehow make selling land on the internet a business, right? Like that's a category of essentially one, but it's all created by taking these new skills and then using them to fulfill and propel what I'm trying to do. Although I'm sure I could go and leverage those skills and create an agency and service other people, it's way more valuable to do it for myself.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me that already you in college and in high school were achieving like a level of financial success that you're probably making more than some people's parents at the time. And what do you think like was different about you where you're just like, oh yeah, I can create like a textbook business all of a sudden and I can make like 90K a year doing this? That's very unusual.
It is very unusual. Yeah. And I will say it's not a redundant question. And because I think it's a totally different context. At that time, I don't think I had any form of an established why. And that's why I consistently hit a ceiling in all of my endeavors, because I just didn't really have that extra rocket fuel to propel me further. To get like totally honest and open with you, a lot of it came from just childhood wounding from my dad, quite frankly. Like I never felt fully seen, and I never felt like I got any accolades for what a lot of my other friends were getting accolades for being smart or being athletic. Like, so I always just kind of assumed I wasn't any of that. So I just kind of said like, yeah, I'm probably lesser than in all those basic categories, but the one variable I can control to prove that I'm worthy is not giving up. And so I had this almost disgusting like fire in my belly where I just wouldn't stop. I was aggressive and obsessive. And so when I was starting the textbook business, like I would pack boxes until my hands would bleed for like 14 hours a day. There was just no other way around it. Like there was nothing glorious about it or nothing like, oh, he's building a business, or like, I was just grinding it out because it was really just to prove to myself that I was a good enough person, honestly. And luckily, I feel like I've really worked through a lot of that. And there's still little demons that come out here and there. But quite frankly, it was just never feeling seen and never feeling good enough. And a lot of it came down to insecurities around intelligence. A lot of it came down to insecurities just around like basic bare level performance, like remembering to do things correctly and, like being on top of the ball and being disciplined, like just stuff that I would get reinforced by really my dad that I wasn't quite there. And I don't think he ever did it with ill intent. It was just, he just wasn't there yet in his life to be able to provide positive feedback. And ironically, not to be that Mr. Positivity, but I really look back at it in terms of having rose-colored lenses, because I'm incredibly grateful for the path that I've walked and where I'm at. And I'm positive that this wouldn't have played out in the way it did had I not gone through those experiences. And so at the time it was really just and I think I would seek out miserable experiences because I was always trying to prove myself constantly. I want to go run 30 miles with no train, like just things where it's just like I needed to prove that I was good enough. And that still rears its little ugly head from time to time. It's gotten a lot better, but just that. And it's, I think everything in life, and I'm using so many platitudes here, but like everything in life, there's that light and that dark, right? And like there was a lot of dark to some of that stuff that I had experienced, but also there was a freaking heck of a lot of light on the other side. And so I wouldn't change it for the world.
Wow, man. That makes sense. That's really interesting to feel like the adversity that you experienced kind of supercharged you, for better or for worse. I have this idealistic, perhaps naive side of myself that's like, oh, well, ideally I would be setting up all of my goals based on the yearning to strive towards something, like some sort of loving guidance and motivation. But in reality, I find that my performance responds, many times when I'm just trying to operate off that, I don't do anything. And then when I'm operating off of fear, I like get my ass in gear.
Yeah, it's so unbelievably accurate. Now, of course, I can only talk from my experience, and I have found that to be 100% the truth. And I've never really found a counter example to it. In fact, one of the interesting things I was going to tie in, as I've gotten deeper into just the world of building businesses, I've had the good fortune of meeting other people that are along the same path, and some of them are way beyond me, like way eons beyond me. And there is such a strong correlation between those people, not just not growing up with money, but honestly, I don't know if I can swear on here, just being fucked up.
You can.
Like just having, okay, cool. Just having a lot of just heavy baggage that they're lugging around through the world. And this, business or what have you is their proving ground. And here's the thing, like just today at 11 o'clock today, I went through with my team and we built out our company roadmap for 2023. And then the 3 people on my team that are salary plus commission based, we built out their new commission plan. And so I've been diving really deep into incentives and how to structure incentives correctly. And McKinsey, which is a big consulting firm, they did a really interesting study on how to correctly incentivize a team. And what they found for a commission-based team, the best way to incentivize them is by actually paying them their commission in advance. And you pay them the commission in advance, assuming that they hit 100% of their quota. So your quota is 500 grand. We're going to pay you whatever the commission would be on that. If you don't hit the $500,000 quota, we take the money back, whatever percentage of it we need to take back. And so this builds in the concept of loss aversion, right? Which we see play out time and time again with humans. And I've seen it every time when I'm running from something is when I'm getting stuff done simultaneously. And so it's like, do you want results, or do you want to be this like perfect being? And I think it's aspirational to want to be that, but I've never experienced that. So I really don't know, man. But what I found is if you can here's what I've also seen is that there's so many people drowning in their misery. And if you can turn that misery into something quote unquote productive, and of course it can take a negative slant and get taken too far, but I think it's a better starting point than just drowning in your sorrow. So I think it's a lesser of the evils. Maybe there is a world when you're truly running towards something. I've yet to ever experience it though.
Hmm.
You know,
Wow.
it's a really great question though. It's actually something I think about often. Like, is everything I'm doing just like fueled out of fear? I don't know. No, I'm figuring it out though. I'm learning.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey to find that balance of like what is sort of spiritually aligned and then what is practical, what actually gets results in this physical world that we're playing in. And yeah, it's good to hear that that people are, actually finding success and sort of are like, yeah, to hear you say, yeah, like running from fear is kind of how it seems to work. It's like, okay, well, at least I know that it's not just me.
You're not alone. No, no,
Yeah.
no, you're not alone. And I feel like I have one foot in, one foot out in terms of being really called to a more spiritual path and then also being highly pragmatic. And
Mm,
what I've seen from those, and I'm gonna make some really broad generalizations here, but to look at those two cohorts, those two groups of people, I often find that the folks that are really ethereal and they're in that spiritual realm typically lack the pragmatic results. And then the folks that are on the far other end of the spectrum typically are so disconnected from source or the world, or like just even understanding the magnitude of how unbelievable this simple experience is here and now and lacking the ability to be present. I want to be somewhere in the middle, but I don't think I want to be too far strung out on either end of the spectrum. So
totally.
that's where I'm shooting.
It's interesting that you say that because I I often find that as a self-proclaimed ethereal person and I feel a little bit too far on the ethereal side for my own taste, and I noticed that actually the people who are not on the most extreme side of the pragmatic world where they're just like evil corporate dictators, but people who are, maybe 2/3 of the way there, 3/4 of the way there, actually unknowingly embody more of the spiritual principles than the people who are kind of giving it lip service over here. And
Mhm, mhm.
I find that sort of ironic, and I think that that's part of the reason why I'm really attracted to a type of spirituality or self-inquiry that's very experience based and very no bullshit, because one of my biggest pet peeves is dealing with people who are just like, it's all love, man, but like you can tell that they don't embody that at all. It's just like they've acquired a textbook of spiritual concepts throughout their life and taken a lot of drugs, and now they're just kind of like, woo.
Yeah.
So
I know the type. I know the type all too well. Yeah. Well, and here's the beautiful thing about I mean it's I guess it's true for any time you're on a path, whatever that path may be. But I think entrepreneurship is a great way to just kind of zoom in a little bit more. You're quite literally turning a concept into reality. I don't know about you, but that is one of the most godly experiences you can experience, to take thought, wherever that may come from, and turn that into reality. I mean, that has done more for my belief that there is so much more to this world than anything else. And you call it manifestation, call it whatever you want, but like that process and the experience of that is worth way more than reading it in, whatever, fill in the blank, whatever spiritual book you want to pop in there. And so I do think there's something beautiful about who you have to become along that journey to achieve anything
mm,
really.
mm,
um, there's just no way that you can be disconnected from from it all, whatever it is. Like
mm,
there's just you tune in to a different frequency, if you will, to turn nothing into something, and it is a beautiful experience. And so
mm.
I do often think that, like, even if I'm doing some of this stuff as a way to avoid fear, I think I'm ultimately learning a lot more about the world than I would just sitting on the sidelines, and I'm
Mm.
okay with that trade-off.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. One thing that's coming to mind before, like, I know we only have a little bit of time left, and and I want to make this as practical to kind of like a younger version of ourselves maybe listening to this. And oh, that makes it feel so profound and meta, actually. But like I'm thinking of, if you were in a position where you were, say, working a regular job somewhere, and you were making, like a normal kind of very middle class-esque level of money that was just kind of getting you by, and you wanted to start a business and increase your financial freedom and increase your impact. What can you lay out maybe like a 3-step framework of what you would recommend to the person in that situation for how they'd go about starting from, I'm not an entrepreneur, I'm just working to like pay the bills and get by, but I have these entrepreneurial aspirations. How should I think about approaching this in terms of like which business I should pursue and how to create a tangible strategy that I can follow day by day that will actually get me there? How are you going about that?
Yeah, really good question. And it's funny, I don't feel that I'm qualified to answer this question, yet I get asked it a lot. So maybe I'm more qualified than I think. Here's my framework for it. So the very first thing that I see a lot of new entrepreneurs doing wrong is that they want to start with a product. A service-based business is always going to be easier to start, less capital intensive, and typically going to be much easier to generate clients than it is to bring awareness to a product. Product-based businesses are more valuable to the world in the long run than a service-based business. They're more scalable, but a service-based business is always going to be where you want to start. I just can't really think of a counter example of why you'd ever want to start with a product-based business. Yet a lot of people try to start there. So I would start with a service-based business. The next thing is I would just take a pen and a paper and start breaking down what are your skills and what are your ideally highest value skills. And then what I would start doing, and this is what I would do in the beginning when I was looking at what my next move was prior to building the Land Pioneer, is I would either reach out to my network or I just started cold emailing people and really just probing what they would pay for under the guise of like whatever skills I had. So like, let's say I was really good at editing videos, right? And we know that nowadays videos are, it's like the new medium, they're everywhere. I would start reaching out to people like, hey, I'm thinking about launching X, Y, and Z for X demographic of people, and they ideally fit in that. I'm thinking about launching a Instagram Shorts editing company for dentists, or I'm thinking about launching a podcast editing company, or whatever it may be. Like whatever your skill set is, reach out to a set demographic and just ask them what they would pay for. And it seems so counterintuitive, like you could start a business by that. Yes, people will tell you what they would pay for. It doesn't always mean that they're going to convert to your customers. I think there is a misnomer there where people get like a guy that says, yes, I will pay for this, and then they don't end up converting. They're like, wait, you said you were going to pay for it. It's okay, keep on asking. But if enough people have given you feedback that it's a skill that would be worth paying for, you're on to something. But it doesn't mean you're going to convert those customers. My very first foray into building a business was in high school. I started a photography company taking pictures for realtors in Carmel. I'd go take a picture of the house for a realtor. Then I would sell that same photo to the contractor, to the architect. So it was like one photo to 3 people. But it all started with, what's this worth to you? Would you pay for it? How many houses are you doing? I just probed, and sure enough, it was valuable to them. So that's how I would start there. I would never, there's far too many people that try to iterate on an idea and start building an idea that's never been validated by the market. Go get it validated. And just because people have raised their hand doesn't mean it's validated yet, but you're onto something. Next, you want to start getting customers. And again, you always look at this like it's a pilot test, like it's an experiment. You're not married to the idea. And I typically would be running multiple experiments at once to figure out what's going to stick. Before I launched the Land Pioneer, I had 3 little experiments going on in the background. One was essentially like a marketing agency for hotels, like boutique hotels and Airbnbs. The next one was a presentation design company, like building out and designing pitch decks and slide decks and PowerPoint presentations, oddly enough. And the third one was a social media marketing agency, which isn't that new or novel. But I was just going cold emailing people and getting feedback around that. And then from there, once you actually have someone that says, yes, I will pay you, one of the kind of the cardinal sins I think a lot of newer entrepreneurs make is they actually charge too little. And why is this problematic? Well, if you charge too little, it's typically not going to be worth your time. And so I see a lot of folks saying, wow, God, I'm not that qualified. Okay, I'll edit your first video for $250 or whatever it may be. And then they end up doing not a great job because it's not enough money for them to really, take it seriously, and they've got other obligations. Charge more than you're worth. You'll be blown away at the fact that people are actually going to be receptive to a higher price. More times than not, too, the deliverable that you provide to that client, they're going to view it as something that's more meaningful. And so charging higher prices is this really uncomfortable point that a lot of people need to move past for service-based businesses, totally different for product-based businesses, but charging substantially more than you think it's actually worth. And it's really interesting. I've got a lot of friends that are in the coaching and consulting space for different verticals. And I've seen a lot of them go from like zero to hero. And I kid you not, the two variables that have really played out for them in their favor has been time in the market. So just being out there and consistently showing up. And that really does pay dividends. There's a lot of goodwill that you build over time. But two was actually just charging higher prices. I had one of my best friends, Zach Colburn, him and I grew up together and went to middle school together. He was a personal trainer, and then he brought his personal training business online. And he ate shit for like the first 2.5, 3 years. And he was charging $150 a month for online coaching, $200 a month for online coaching. And he went and met this guy named Ross Johnson, who was a business coach. And he told him a few little golden nuggets, but in essence, the number one thing that he walked away from was charging more. That next month, he did over 10 grand in his coaching business with no, it wasn't, I got more clients, it wasn't anything like that. It was simply just raising what he was charging. And then the stickiness of his service actually increased because the students that were in the program that were being coached by him adhered to the plan at a higher degree. They followed the meal plan better, they trained better, so they got better results. Then they told their friends about it. And it has this whole cascading effect. And so charge more. It should be on an amount that when you say it, you almost want to laugh and it makes you uncomfortable. That's a huge point, because I think a lot of people, they start something, they're getting some traction. It's not enough to support them. It's not enough for them to take the work seriously. And then as a byproduct, the client doesn't really take it seriously either. So charging more. And those 3 points, what was the last point? I had one other. It's on the tip of my tongue, but really that's it, right? I mean, I think the idea is, let's start service-based. Let's figure out what our skills are. Let's go pitch those skills to either people we know or people that are in our network, or go wider and start cold emailing, and then just charge more. And don't be afraid to have multiple of these going at once. So long as you can deliver here, that's okay, right? And in fact, what's really interesting, when I first was experimenting with those 3 different business ideas, I was white labeling the services. I wasn't even fulfilling the services, because I started to get myself in a bind where I'm like, I don't even know if I can deliver on these. I'll figure out a way to deliver on them, and I can hire once I get traction. But I was just finding other freelancers that could source the work, and then I was just arbitraging the difference. And so it's okay to juggle multiple things at once. I think a lot of times the best business ideas and just the best businesses in general are the ones that on paper seem ridiculous. And you wouldn't really think they're going to work. And typically the ones that flop are the ones that seem like, oh, duh, this is such an obvious idea. It's a great business. More times than not, I'm always surprised that it's the ones that you've discounted in terms of ideas. And ultimately, I think, like, on the point of ideas, I think ideas are highly overrated. I think most businesses fail because they just aren't able to go reach the group of people that actually find their services valuable. And so getting good at marketing, getting good at copywriting, and getting good at finding where communities live on the internet is a really valuable skill. Because I know far too many people that have a great service, they just don't know how to find the end users. They're out there, you just haven't found them. But it doesn't mean that your service is bad.
Boom.
That's the episode. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel. And as a thank you, I want to leave you with the number one gem that I got from Sumner in this podcast, which is prioritizing your energy in a smart way when you're starting your first business. He said a lot of people make the mistake of spending time and energy building a website, getting a business bank account, starting an LLC, when they should be putting their energy towards getting their first paying client, because that will motivate us to continue building the business and allow us to test if our ideas have value faster. I noticed Sumner is someone who just dives at any new idea that he wants to start, and I think that's served him well because he's failing fast, and that allows him to hit success even faster. So that's my number one takeaway. Thank you again. Please subscribe to the YouTube, to the podcast, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.